right now we are measuring, and our entire measuring of cities is there a traffic jam or not? Maybe a little bit of air pollution, but we don't measure good things. We don't measure how many people met each other, how many children were able to just run on the street without being scared, how many parents didn't hold their kids' hand because it was safer, and so it was nicer to walk on the street. I think that in a way, in terms of measuring, like we do with, let's say, more new ways to measure green spaces or new ways to measure active spaces, I think that's where quote unquote smart cities should go, trying to find ways to measure what is important rather to then try to find solutions to what we now measure, which is completely the wrong things.
Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have an interesting conversation with Lior Steinberg. Lior is an urban planner currently based in Rotterdam and the co-founder of Humankind City, which is an agency for urban change helping cities, organizations, brands, and other change makers tackle the most complex urban challenges. Lior tells us about his multidisciplinary background and how he came to be an urban planner. He talks about his love of technology and finding ways to make life better through technology before discussing the diverse backgrounds he sees in the world of urbanism. Lior then discusses what a smart community is to him and how the concept of a stupid city helps him determine whether the cities we live in now are smart cities. Before we talk about some of the technology solutions that are not always the most efficient and how more communities can incorporate different modes of transport. Lior then tells us about his company and some of the projects they have been working on. We discuss Lior's smart approach to implementing plans for his clients before discussing the need for communities to identify what is important to them, be able to measure that data, and use technology to then improve those communities. We finish our chat discussing the emerging trends of micromobility and how more communities are adopting these modes of transport and the 5G network with more available sensors. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Lior. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. And let's just jump straight in. Can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, so, my name is Lior Steinberg. I'm an urban planner, and I am a co-founder of Humankind City. It's a Rotterdam-based agency for urban change. But my background, like many of your people you've hosted, is quite multidisciplinary. I think that's something that is common to many people excited about smart cities or great cities. I used to be a computer programmer for 6 years, so that's what I did when I started my adult life. After 6 years, I realized that I don't want to sit in front of a computer every day, and that's why I made a change to urban planning. I obtained my master's in urban planning from Stockholm University, where I learned really about working with communities and the importance of inclusion in cities. I mean, Stockholm is quite famous for building a just society, or at least in some aspects. So that's where I got really passionate into the understanding of the needs of different communities and different social groups and ethnic groups. So that's what I learned there. And for the past 5-6 years, I've been living in the Netherlands, now in Rotterdam, before that in a city called Groningen. That's where we started Humankind City. Just to finish off the journey from programming in Tel Aviv to being an urban planner in Rotterdam. I am still really fascinated by technology. I love technology. I'm against the use of technology as a marketing tool to sell big contracts to municipalities, but I love technology. I'm excited about it. And I am also excited about finding ways to use technology to make life better. But I try to look at it from the urban planning side rather than from the technology side. And unlike many people in the field of smart cities, I know both worlds. So I'm not really excited when someone tells machine learning. I know how it works. I mean, it's not a magic.
No, I love that. And I actually didn't realize you had that computer programming background. I may have realized originally, but yeah, I was just thinking like urban planning. Okay, yeah, cool. So, and I've kind of gone the other way. I'm not a planner. I hang out with a lot of planners, but I started as an engineer, then going into the smart city place. So, building stuff, infrastructure, etc. So I understood that kind of, government side of things, etc. And now I'm doing a master's of data science. So now I'm playing with the machine learning and the analytics and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I wanted to flip the lid on, well, what does it mean when we say machine learning? What can it do? What can't it do? And yeah, it's not magic, right? Building models and that type of thing as well. So, and I think it's interesting. Yeah, a lot of people that I interview, one thing we do all have in common, we're all very different, but that we do have that multidisciplinary kind of approach. And knowing two sides of something is, I think, really important, or really makes it really interesting. Because, yeah, I like how you said you're not excited when people say machine learning because, okay, well, yeah, I did that. Been there, done that.
Yeah, and I think, first of all, I think it's important to, like you, understand the world from different angles, from the engineering, but then also maybe from computer science, and then maybe from sociology or psychology. But I think that the most important skill, and that's why, learning different things is important, but the most important skill in urbanism, in my opinion, is the ability to understand that there are different perspectives. So that's the making the connections between different worlds. So in this way, it's just a practice. So learning computer programming, but then urban planning is just a practice to learn the third and the fourth and the fifth thing or the fifth element. So I think that's, you see it a lot in the world of urbanism. People who started as whatever, and then realized that they love cities and went to study urban planning, or like you, starting from engineering and going to data science.
Yeah, and I think in, this day and age, I think that's an old person thing to say these days. I realize that the more I hang out with younger people than me, I used to be the young person, and that's what old people say too, right? Now it's like, oh, well, back in my day.
That's reality, right? We used to be the young people.
We used to be the young people. Was always the youngest person, like in any, boardroom or whatever, whereas now I'm not so much anymore, which is great because I love to get those different perspectives, etc. And then learn that the things that I say that I thought were cool are not actually cool anymore, and they don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, let's go back to you. We started talking about people moving around, doing, deciding that they love cities and other things like that. Let's talk about smart cities and smart communities. What is a smart community to you?
Okay, so do you want the short answer or the long answer?
I would like the long answer.
Okay, so the long answer would be, it's very difficult to define it, and it's a tricky question, of course. And I think among, let's say, the new wave urbanists or the more human-oriented urbanists, we all agree that a smart city has nothing to do with sensors per se or with interconnected machines. It's more about the needs of a community and creating safe, accessible cities. So I will not say anything new here, just like everybody says. We need to plan for people first and then use technology to make it happen. And in cities, we've been doing it for generations, for thousands of years. We have a need, and then we find a technology that helps this need. Paving a road is also an amazing technology. Probably it was more revolutionary than just, inventing a new sensor. So in that sense, I'm all in for technologies making life of people better. But for me, a smart city would be basically the opposite of a stupid city. So now saying smart city is very much into, when you say it, you just, even if you don't believe in it, the picture you have in your mind are those commercials and marketing we get from tech giants. They are doing the work. They try to sell us a product. I like to always go to the stupid city question, because then it's very easy to see the difference between a smart and a stupid city. So take, for instance, traffic. A stupid city is a place where you need to sit 2 hours in traffic in order to get to work, and then 1 hour in order to pick up your children, and then get home tired and realize that you've been spending 3 hours in traffic in order to just live your life. So that's stupid. And then what is smart? Smart for maybe for a technology company that tries to sell self-driving car or interconnected traffic lights. A smart city would be a place where technology would solve those problems. For me, I know that those solutions don't work, either because we already have them and they don't work, or they've never been proved to be working, like self-driving car. That might even lead to more traffic in the future. So I look for what works. I think that's a smart thing to do, right? Look for what worked and just copy that. So I'm looking at a place like the Netherlands, where I live now, or Denmark, or other countries around the world who realized, let's give more space for public transport, walking, cycling. That solves traffic. In Dutch cities, there is no traffic jams in the city centers because everybody has bicycle or can walk or use public transportation. So that's for me a smart city. A smart city is a city that looks at solutions that already worked. They can be technological, they can be policy solutions, and just adapt them to the local context and not afraid for making big changes.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I love the concept of, well, what is a stupid city? And I think some of us would then look around and go, oh, where are we? Which cunt are we sitting in right now? And I love bringing it back to those other forms that, you know, an autonomous vehicle, again, is still a vehicle sitting on a road at the end of the day. And yeah, we may be able to be more productive when it is proven or whatever the case may be. But if we're still sitting in traffic, or we're sitting in even more traffic, then yeah, is it smart, or is it just, you know, now we've got a technology solution, but not actually solving the problem that we're trying to actually solve, which is being able to, have better cities.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's say that the dream of self-driving electric cars will happen, and we all agree that it will not solve traffic problems. So you will still sit in traffic. You will still take much more space than you deserve to take. So because you're one person sitting in a big metal box that takes the space of at least 10 people that could walk or sit in a transit. And then what you would do, you would not need to drive. So you would use the smartphone and just like look at your smartphone and work. And then we just need to ask ourselves, did we create a smart solution, or did we create yet another miserable commuting experience? But instead of driving, you will just be looking at commercials on your phone.
Mm. Yeah, now you're working like 12 hours a day instead of 8 or whatever.
Exactly.
Yes. And I think wellness and health is something that we need to really feed into there as well, because like you just said, like, are we just, okay, now there's a more efficient solution, but it's like equally as miserable, which is definitely not what we want to do. So I think there's lots of examples of that too. It's like, okay, great. Now we have another way to, I guess, do something that we're not really that interested in doing in the first place. But being in Amsterdam was a real experience for me, particularly coming from Australia, that, you had to watch out for like bicycle traffic as soon as you step off the train. I was like, oh my God, what's happening here? And it was wild, really. And then even I met with the director of traffic for the Amsterdam Traffic Authority, whatever they're called. Sorry, can't remember. Transit agency, and talking about autonomous vehicles. And she was like, we haven't really looked into that because we're just trying to make our public transport more effective. And we actually have like bicycle jam problems. Like we've got this like next level of planning issues of, there's too many bicycles, or parking for bicycles, which, in Australia, that is a problem that many cities would love to have, because it's that next order issue where you're like, oh, we've solved this problem. Okay. There's always going to be further and further things that you can do to improve things and make it better. But it was really interesting because, I mean, this is probably fairly normal for you, but, going to a coffee shop and she pulls up on her bike, she folds her bike, it sits right next to her as she, we have our coffee, and then she unpacks it again and rides away. And, that would never happen here in Australia at this point in time, because it's like, oh, how inconvenient, there's a bike there. But there it's normal, right?
But imagine your quality of life where you don't, so you hop on your vehicle. In the Netherlands, it would be a bicycle. In Australia or Israel, it would be a car. And then you want to stop in a coffee shop, and you just can't do it on a car. Or if you see a neighbor passing by, you cannot stop and talk with them. And it's like a daily experience that every day you go through the same terrible commute. And the crazy thing about it is that, I mean, it's so miserable, the way that most people go to work around the world nowadays. It's so terrible. And in such a terrible situation, we just look for magic solutions. And we are being promised this solution right now. And we just look for this solution. So we are waiting for that. Big tech giants see this need. They might also believe that it might solve a solution. I think most urbanists who have integrity know that it cannot solve traffic problems, or at least if they just spend 10 minutes thinking about the math and the geometry of cities, realizing that it just doesn't work. Having self-driving cars, taking everyone to anywhere, I mean, it would just create the same problem. But we are so looking forward to solve this terrible problem and have an experience that is more similar to Amsterdam experience, where you can just pick up a coffee while you're driving, that we just say, okay, yeah, well, it's so terrible now. Let's just hope that self-driving cars will solve it.
Yeah, no, it is an interesting one. I think that, yeah, particularly in Australia, there's a place, and whether it's in cities, I don't necessarily think it is, for autonomous technology, but also the fact that we want to shape what it looks like when it comes in. So it is thinking about that active component of it. It is thinking about how that can work together with not just autonomous vehicles, but whatever new technology. But also, like you said, it's prioritizing those modes that are going to increase the enjoyment of being able to commute or travel or whatever the case, whatever we're actually doing. But I also feel like when I was in Amsterdam as well, I just felt very safe when I was walking around. And it was like this bicycle just makes you happy, even if you're not on one. I don't know what it was, but I was just like, just so happy.
I think it's the sound. It's the sound of the bike rolling. It at least makes me happy.
Yes, me too. Okay. Anyway, enough about that. Let's move on. Tell us about the projects and things that you're currently working on.
Yeah, so we have an office called Humankind. It is based in Rotterdam, and I think that the name pretty much says what we try to do. We try to make cities that are human and kind to ourselves, to others, and to the planet. And the projects we are working on all have sort of a similar topic, which are, let's look at urban issues that we have right now, try to look at them from a different angle or from a multidisciplinary way, and propose an urban solution, policy, intervention, etc. So we've been doing a lot of research, projects, strategy, documents, and urban public space design. So it goes everything urban or everything city. We're not working per se outside the city centers or outside cities. So I cannot say much about self-driving cars in small communities outside the city. I mean, there are people that are much more capable to answer those questions. But when it comes to the city center or to cities or urban settlements, that's where we are working. So just an example for a project. We've been in Rotterdam. We've been working a lot on a project called Happy Streets, in which we, together with the municipality and other parties, we retrofit, using tactical urbanism, we retrofit streets to accommodate more people and show the future. So it might be we take traveling lanes and turn them into bigger sidewalks or places to sit or bike lanes, tactical bike lanes, and we measure the effect of those interventions. But then later on, we take those results and we take also the feedback from the community or from the people, and we propose, let's say, a permanent solution. So that would be an example for a project. But another type of project would be developing a tool to measure the greenness of streets. So using different technologies like satellite imagery, or image recognition tools to just basically measure the greenness of street and identify in which streets or which places in the street there is enough space and need to add more green elements. So that would be another type of project.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. And So when you're doing the happy streets, so you get then feedback from the community about what they like, what they don't like, and then do you then take that and I guess adjust as needed?
Yeah, I mean, this idea of trying out before you make a permanent plan, I would call it a smart approach. You, instead of investing millions in retrofitting a street, you would do it for a week or a month. You will just try out, see what happens. And then you will first see with your own eyes if it works, your solution works. Then you will get the feedback, and then you will just change the plan according to what happened. I mean, that's a little bit like startup companies work in an agile way, right? You get first, you do the first sprint, you get the feedback, then you adapt. I mean, it's not the solution for everything. You cannot build a metro project like this, right? You cannot, with tactical urbanism, you just dig out a small tunnel and then a bigger one. But things like closing off the street for cars on the weekend, this is something you can just try out. And then if it works, you can think about, can we do it in the future? What does it take to do in order to do it in the future? Do we need to work better with the businesses there? Do we need to provide more ways to arrive to the city without a car, etc.? So this is something you can do in an agile way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think trying stuff out is really key. And particularly when so I'm thinking about some like cities and towns in Australia where it may be the first time that they're doing something that's a bit different. But we know that we do close streets for events and, you know, that type of thing. So just making it a more regular event. And then, okay, well, this works quite well. And then, you know, adding on and seeing how far you can kind of go with that. And then measuring the data, right? Like, are people using it? What are they saying, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, if you do it, I mean, that's the place where you need to start measuring. So right now we are measuring, and our entire measuring of cities is there a traffic jam or not? Maybe a little bit of air pollution, but we don't measure good things. We don't measure how many people met each other, how many children were able to just run on the street without being scared, how many parents didn't hold their kids' hand because it was safer, and so it was nicer to walk on the street. I think that in a way, in terms of measuring, like we do with, let's say, more new ways to measure green spaces or new ways to measure active spaces, I think that's where quote unquote smart cities should go, trying to find ways to measure what is important rather to then try to find solutions to what we now measure, which is completely the wrong things.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I had a couple of conversations with people kind of around measuring, like having wellness as a measurement, like like a KPI or like a target, rather than just, you know, okay, well, we'll have, you know, these things that we always think about, low traffic or air pollution, etc. But then, an increase of these good things that we want to see in our cities and how we actually measure those. Because I think a lot of the time we think that it's really like intangible, like we can't measure these things. But I think if we can use technology in a good way to measure these things, to make it quite obvious whether they're going up or down, then we can do something about it as well. Yeah,
and there are companies offering products that I find a bit creepy. I mean, measuring, I don't know, putting a camera and measuring the amount of smiles, or just offering cities to, I don't know, censor social media activity to tell the city if people are happy or not. I find it a bit crazy. But I think that if we will go back to old way of urbanism, which means a bit slower, sitting on the street, observing the people, seeing what's important, I think then later on we can go back to the office and think about technologies that can foster that or measure that. Right now we have a little bit, it's a bit, the way we are now solving it, or companies are now solving it, is a bit shallow. Oh, you want to know what people think? Let's see what data is available, or social media is available. Let's just use it, etc. So,
no, thanks for bringing that up, because I was thinking, let's not go into like having facial recognition and, you know, oh, there's this many people smiling and this person's angry or whatever. No, that is not what we're talking about here. So thank you for bringing that in, because that is interesting. Actually, I need to get him on to the podcast. I've heard him speak a couple of times, and doing research into facial recognition and like the measuring of people, like, oh, this person's suspicious or whatever, and how wrong it is, essentially, because the data you have is what produces the output, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, all sorts of wrong. Okay, well, let's zoom to the future now. Tell us about the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough.
Well, unfortunately, we all live in those bubbles, right? So probably everything I will talk about, I mean, all the people around me have been hearing about a lot, but it might be that in other places people didn't hear about it. So I would say what happened during the COVID situation, where cities have been just removing a car infrastructure and replacing it with more places for people to cycle, to walk. I think those are emerging trends that if leading cities will stick to, they will not go back. So you see Paris, that just basically closed off streets in the city center, allowing cyclists to go there. Tel Aviv in Israel has closed, I think, 12 or 11 or 12 streets completely for cars. We've been involved in some of those projects. Rotterdam has been, during the first wave of the first outbreak of the coronavirus, people were allowed only to sit outside, and then basically hundreds of parking spaces were removed. So businesses would be able to let more people sit outside. So those trends of just basically realizing we don't have a space problem in the city, we have a mobility problem in which we give too much space to cars. That's a trend that is coming up. There are, of course, the 5G trend and ever cheaper, ever more available sensors. I'm not afraid, because I think it is exciting to see what it can bring, but I'm afraid that because it becomes so available and it seems like there is not much cost, or at least let's say popularity cost for this decision makers. They can just show that they are doing something for the city. I'm afraid that more and more cities will just pack their streets with sensors, hoping that one of the algorithms will bring a solution to the variety of urban issues. So that's definitely a trend that is happening, and is happening with big tenders and deals happening between cities and big companies. So we don't always hear about it, but you see those big deals happening. And the last trend which I would just say interesting to follow, would be the shared mobility companies that basically solve some issue or provide a solution for a need, which are those, like, let's say, short distance traveling, all those e-scooters and the shared bikes. But on the other end, they have a very weakened way of working, which is they just leave their products on the street, on the public space. And I think that there is a lot of pushback from residents that suffer from that, and people that got hit by those scooters, or that cannot walk on the sidewalk because the scooters block their sidewalk. So that is something in general in terms of policy, and the question, who owns public space, what is a city, what is innovation in a city, and how can we redistribute space between the public and private companies. I think that's something to look at.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think there's like different approaches that people are taking for micromobility, like new, I guess, modes for sure. And when I traveled around, I definitely saw many different approaches to, like, every street was littered with scooters or whatever, or there was no scooters whatsoever. They weren't allowed, but some had like shared bicycles, which are a bit more, I guess, you can't just park them anywhere. It's like, in different space or whatever. But yeah, it is interesting, and I think interesting to follow and interesting to just see where it does end up going. What I do, particularly in Australia, what I do like about that micromobility trend is it gets different other vehicles, as in smaller vehicles, in people's eyes, so then they're aware of them, because particularly in Australia, in cities and in regional towns, it's car, and maybe there's a cyclist. And I think if people it's like normalized to jump on a bike or a scooter or whatever, then it brings that active transport in people's faces a bit more, so it makes it a bit more normalized. But I totally agree. There's a balance there between public space and pedestrians for sure, and the policies need to be right so then everybody can be safe, like on the footpath, on the road, etc., and then how that will actually work. So it is interesting, one to follow.
And I think it's also a great example of what happens when companies with a lot of money meet cities that have no vision. So a city has no vision. It's already for decades been giving more and more space for car traffic. It's not doing anything to promote active mobility. Then a company comes, the mayor is happy. They say, yeah, look, we have American companies coming here. Look how great it is. But if the city doesn't do anything, it doesn't have a vision about how their active mobility policy or how their mobility policy should look like with active modes, then what happens is that cars still enjoy their space, and the weakest actor on the public space, which is us people, pedestrians, need to suffer because now there is and then we create this terrible argument between pedestrians and cyclists or scooter users that all need to use the same very limited space. We sometimes have car owners or drivers that say, those bicycle people, they're crazy. They just jump all over around. And we don't really create a solution where everybody can share the road. We just let the weakest actors on the public space to fight with each other. And that's terrible.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that's a really good point and something that, that's what that policy angle or that vision. It's like, well, okay, we want different modes, but we've already got this tiny little limited area. So if we can expand that, so we're actually encouraging more people on the active modes rather than the travel, rather than discouraging people from the active modes potentially because they're conflicting with each other so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been so great to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I very much enjoyed this Friday afternoon chat for me, Friday morning where you are. I just have one last question, which is how can people connect with you?
So I'm completely connected in all medias and every platform. So that's very smart of me. No, you can find me on Twitter, mostly Lior Steinberg, or Humankind City, and LinkedIn. Or just drop me an email, and after a few weeks I will answer. Or meet me on the street, corner cafe. That's the best way to find me, either in Rotterdam or Tel Aviv.
Sounds perfect. We will put all the links in the show notes, and it'd be great to be in the same place physically at one time or another, maybe in a little bit distant future, given everything that is going on. But one day we'll make it happen. It's been so great to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks, Zoe.
We'll talk soon. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.